This is Demetria Spinrad.
And this is Isaac Meyer.
And you're listening to Criminal Records Podcast, a podcast about some of the weirdest cases in true crime history. And Isaac, today I know that we are going back to Japan.
Yes, I'm returning to my old stomping grounds for a Criminal Records classic. Something that I actually came across doing research for another series, like the gang incident, the 5 Men of Naniwa that we did a few months ago. This was a case I discovered because it was peripherally referred to in some of the research I was doing for that series on the history of Osaka. And it looked like such an interesting case that I just couldn't help but try and dive a little more deeply into it. Turns out there's some great research on it. And so I was able to put it together into not just an episode, but my own very first 2-part episode, because there's just so much to talk about here. And Demetria, it's one of your favorite things. We're talking about scam artists once again.
Oh, I love a good scam artist. So, okay, take me through this. Who is being scammed? Who is the scammer? In what context is the scam occurring?
All right, so the scam in question is known rather euphemistically as the Osaka Incident of 1827. It has to do with a diviner, a spirit medium named Toyota Mitsugi and her disciples. And they are operating in Japan in the 1810s to 1820s in the two cities of Osaka and Kyoto in the center of the country. So first, if you don't know those cities, Osaka is the port heart of feudal Japan. It's at the center of the feudal economy of the Tokugawa shoguns who rule the country at this time. The two major trade routes, creatively called the Eastern and Western trade route, meet in the middle in Osaka and connect basically the whole country via coastal shipping routes. The city is a home for finance, for the rice commodity market and the agricultural economy. The Dojima Rice Exchange is a pretty big deal. It's home to the Junin Ryogai, the 10 money exchange houses, who are collectively essentially the nation's banks, some of the most powerful financial families in the country. And it's also one of very few cities that is not majority samurai in its population. It's majority merchants, not majority samurai. And because of its strategic and economic importance, it's territory that is managed directly by the shogun, the ruler of the Tokugawa shogunate. It's not given out to a vassal. Instead, he relies on his own immediate followers, chiefly the two Machibugyo, the city magistrates, to control the city on his behalf because of how important it is. So that's Osaka.
Okay, so I'm seeing how the law works in a very particular and distinct way in this city. But if I'm remembering my Japanese history correctly, being a spirit medium is not inherently fraudulent. That is a genuine religious activity, right?
It is, yes, and it's actually a pretty big one in the other major city in the area, in Kyoto, which traditionally is the home to the Japanese aristocracy, but it's also a religious kind of center of pilgrimage with a lot of spirit mediums. The tricky thing about mediumship is that, particularly for the god who is most associated with mediums during this time, Inari, who we can talk more about in a second, there's a pretty big split between what you might call like official Inari worship and unofficial Inari worship. And official Inari mediums, that's like a legit thing. Even to this day, if you go to a major Inari shrine, you look at those are the ones that have like the thousands of torii gates, the red gates. If you can read Japanese, you can see who's donating them. It's a lot of like businesses who will donate to an Inari shrine and get an oracle done for like a big venture, right? And they'll get a little gate dedicated to them for donating to the shrine in that way. So that is a legit thing. And the official shrines operate in a very traditional way. They have traditionally trained, like male Shinto priests. Generally, women are also relegated to more minor roles in these traditional shrines, usually as miko, as shrine maidens. But there's also a pretty substantial tradition of unofficial mediums who are not trained in these major shrines, who are often women because women are more associated with spirit mediumship traditionally in native Japanese religion for a variety of really complicated reasons that we can't really get into here, and who are a little bit more, like, they're considered a little more, how do I put this? vagranty, untrustworthy. They don't have official training. They don't like go through the rigorous licensing process that most Shinto shrines go through. They don't have to adhere to the religious orthodoxy that is structured out where most shrines are licensed by one of two major families, the Yoshida and the Shirakawa families, that ensure they're kind of doing things right. So because of that, they're viewed as kind of iffy, kind of tricky. People, I don't even. I guess the way to think of it would be like the official shrines, official diviners have a degree of social status. They're educated. They're like, your regular old priest come to town. And the unofficial ones are more like the person like with a Ouija board in the back of like a crusty looking shop or something like that. Someone who's a little bit more shifty in character. That makes sense?
It's making sense to me. What I'm curious about, I know that folks who listen to the History of Japan podcast have gotten a primer on Inari worship recently because you covered that. But for folks who haven't listened to that podcast, is there a legal distinction here between what is officially Inari worship and what is not officially Inari worship? And why is the government getting in? If there's a legal distinction, why is the government getting involved in making that distinction?
That is a great question. So first and foremost, I'm going to give a quick intro to Inari worship because it is important for what we're talking about. If you want more, there is, as Demetrius said, a whole History of Japan episode you can go to. History of Japan 485 is the history of Inari worship. You can get 35 glorious minutes just on that. But here's the quick and dirty rundown. By this point in Japanese history, Inari is probably the single most popular god in the whole country. If you listen to History of Japan, you know that approximately 1 out of every 3 Shinto shrines in Japan is an Inari shrine, and that doesn't account unofficial shrines or like roadside personal ones. So, big deal as gods go. Kind of an interesting history. Inari is one of the oldest venerated deities in the country. Their history goes back to the earliest parts of Japanese history, where initially they're a clan god, an Ujigami, for one of the major aristocratic families, the Hata family, who have their family shrine at Mount Inari, which is the southern end of the Higashiyama Mountains in the eastern part of Kyoto. When the imperial court and the emperors of Japan move to Kyoto, and that becomes the imperial capital, Inari becomes pretty prominent, pretty important, because that shrine's right nearby. And then Inari worship is spread as Kyoto becomes a religious center of pilgrimage. Officially, we're talking about a harvest god. That's Inari's initial role. Like, the original name of Inari meant something like creating rice. But generally, Inari takes on the role of a good fortune or prosperity god over time. And there is this interesting tradition of regulation associated with Inari, because Inari worship is not regulated in the same way other gods are. So other shrines have to get, well, they don't have to. It's encouraged for them to get licensed by one of the major families in Kyoto that handles priest licensing, the Yoshida or the Shirakawa. The job of those families is to ensure that the priests are trained in orthodox theology, all that good stuff. Inari doesn't have to do this, because Inari, by a weird trick of fate, has a rank as a god within the Kyoto court nobility. Inari was actually promoted up the court nobility in exchange for, I think, curing several of the emperors of diseases and putting down a couple rebellions. And because of that, Inari shrines automatically get the legal perks that licensed shrines have to, like, get that recognition for. Inari just gets that.
I really need you to explain what is happening legally here, because this is so wild. So Inari, a deity who exists not in the material plane.
In complicated metaphysical. Yeah.
In a very complicated metaphysical way, has an earthly legal designated status as a person.
Yes, senior first rank, I believe, in the Kyoto court nobility.
God bless a bureaucracy that sees a literal deity and goes, this person needs a rank.
Yeah, it's pretty, like, I don't even know what the modern equivalent of this would be. I guess, like, if you prayed to God and were like, if you do me a solid, I'll, like, get Congress to give you the Medal of Honor or something. Like, and if it worked,
I also gotta say, a literal god, not even top ranking, and not even right under the emperor either,
well,
is my understanding.
I believe they've capped out as far as you can be without being a prince of the imperial family.
Oh yeah, Inari, you better step up your game if you want to rise any higher than that.
I mean, you don't want to step on the imperial family's gods. That's a whole other. That's a you don't want to get Amaterasu angry with you. She zaps people. It's not great.
So I've noticed something interesting here, which is that you have not used a gendered pronoun for Inari.
I have not. The gender of Inari is very complicated because I would argue both because of Inari's popularity and because Inari operates outside the kind of government controlled system of temple management to a degree, or shrine management, I should say. There's a lot of variability in Inari theology, and the way Inari is described is through like this whole kind of gamut of the gender spectrum. Sometimes as male, sometimes as female, sometimes as neither or both. There's this kind of complicated, like Inari kind of represents such a broad notion of fortune that their image is very malleable across time and space. This is also where sometimes you see Inari represented as a fox. If you ask an official Inari shrine, they'll get very mad at you and say Inari is not a fox. Inari's messenger is a fox. Foxes deliver messages from Inari the same way deer do from Take Mikazuchi. But if you go to a non-traditional Inari diviner, they'll be like, yeah, sure, fox, whatever, it's cool. So this is, I think, the kind of interesting thing about Inari. That is incredibly popular as kind of a spiritual being because of the broadness of kind of categories they can represent, and also kind of slightly outside of the official system of religious management, which is perhaps why Inari will intersect so nicely with the very first of our criminals today, whose name is Toyota Mitsugi. So, Toyota Mitsugi, and by the way, I'm using Japanese name orders here, as always. Toyota is the family name, Mitsugi is the personal name. She's born in 1774 in what's now Toyama Prefecture, what was then Echu Province. This is rural, it's up on the Japan Sea coast, but not too far from Kyoto. Specifically, she's from a small village called Arama in Niikawa County. And the very year after she's born, in 1775, her parents, Yohei and San, and her elder brother Kazue move the family to the city of Kyoto. Technically, they're already criminals just for doing this. So they're peasants. They're not supposed to leave the countryside because their agricultural labor is what sustains the whole economy. It's a rural agrarian economy. But farming is hard work that does not pay very well. So a lot of farmers try to leave the countryside to go to the city and work in service industries that pay a lot better or just like are physically easier on your body. And that's pretty clearly what her family did. We don't know what happened to her parents, but her brother becomes a yin-yang diviner using the I Ching, the Book of Changes, this Chinese classic of divination, to try and become a diviner professionally. Toyota Mitsugi, meanwhile, will work first as a maid for several families in the area, and then eventually she gets involved into the sex trade after her father dies. She's taken in by a woman who runs a tea house and basically puts her into the work of prostitution. However, this does not it doesn't have quite the same level of stigma. There's still a stigma, but not quite the same level as it does in Europe. She is eventually able to get married to a man named Iori. Iori is from a moderately prestigious rural family. His family are Shinto shrine priests. They run a shrine to Hachiman in what's now Shiga Prefecture, what was then Omi Province. As a result, Iori is educated, and one thing he knows how to do is that same type of divination that Mitsugi's brother knows how to do, and from him, she learns how to do this.
So this is very interesting because you've told me in the past a lot about kind of ritual rules around purity and the impurity of the female body after sex work. So is this something that is not happening in this case, or she has decided to obscure some of her past in this case? Do we have any information about what's going on there?
It's a little bit unclear because a lot of this is taken from interrogation records after this whole thing comes crumbling down. My understanding is that for a regular old street diviner, the sexual purity side of things is not as important. If you are working in like a shrine, like as directly as a part of a shrine, generally that would be something that's interrogated a lot more. But she's not. So eventually, her husband will leave her. In 1810, he finds another woman named Katsura and just leaves Toyota Mitsugi. There's no divorce law in Japan at this point, but leaving like that is essentially a divorce. And it's right around this time that Toyota Mitsugi, who has learned this from Iori, starts taking up the practice of an Inari spirit medium, channeling Inari on the behalf of interested patrons to try and see the future. And this is what she has to say about it afterwards. Quote, I had no interest or training in ordinary women's work, and from the time I worked as a prostitute, I wanted to try my hand at performing mysterious feats. I made a living this way for some 4 years, and gradually I won more clients, yet I had doubts about this profession. Inari mediums, I reckoned, are no more than practitioners of fox witchery. Their profession is just a game, getting people excited by shaking a wand and tricking ignorant men and women. Some people may escape hunger and cold with the help of such crude trickery, but no amount of prayer rituals of that sort will actually heal, and the true future remains out of sight. In the end, it would be impossible, I realized, to astound people and make a name for myself in the city and beyond by sticking to such methods. In my heart, I mocked the entire profession.
Okay, so right off the bat, she is doing what she understands to be a magic show that is not a genuine religious practice. So she is not coming from a perspective of, I believe this sincerely, and then things get weird. She is starting out with the understanding that she is a fraud.
At first, yes. And then sometime, right, a little bit after this, a couple of years after this, she has a religious experience and becomes convinced that she has this new god who is kind of operating through her, who we're going to talk about in a second. And she continues, or not a second, it's going to be a while. There's a lot of complicated dynamics to cover here. But she has this religious experience. She becomes convinced of this new god that is operating through her, but continues to front as an Inari medium because Inari is so popular. There's more kind of common acceptance of Inari, right? So that, yeah, it's more marketable, I guess. People know, they know what to expect when they go to an Inari medium. So she keeps operating in that way.
Okay, so she is both sincerely believing that she is channeling a god and pretending to channel a different god as kind of a brand recognition tool.
I would say that is a fair way to summarize it. And doing this, she becomes much more successful as a diviner, starts to make a name for herself, and most importantly, she starts to take disciples. All women who are looking to pick up divination as a way to make money for themselves or sustain themselves economically. The first and most important of these is a woman named Kinu, who is born in 1768, so she's a little bit older than Mitsugi. She's from a merchant family originally. Her family are called the Inadereya. Her parents die young, though, and she has no other relatives, so she moves to Kyoto to try and make a living as a servant. Eventually, she will get married to a merchant named Kyoya Kihei and live in the southeastern part of the city. If you know Kyoto, her house was near Hokoji, but her husband takes ill in 1804 and dies, and so she doesn't have that economic support, and she ends up taking up mediumship. She actually meets Mitsugi when Mitsugi is still married to Iori and starts following her at that time in kind of more traditional divination. And says that at first Mitsugi does very little that's different from regular mediums, but after she gets left by Iori, something changes. Her description was, quote, she, Mitsugi, was performing water austerities, and within half a year, more than half her divinations were hitting the mark, and quite a few of her clients recovered when she conducted healing rituals.
So she is going from a medium with a kind of rough hit rate on the healing to someone who actually does seem to have some kind of mystical power.
That's what it looks like to Kinu, at least. That like something has changed in what Mitsugi is doing, and it's making her like more spiritually potent. Her spirit power has leveled up, to use a somewhat crude analogy. And so she asks naturally, "Hey, can I learn to do this too? Since you're my teacher." And eventually Mitsugi does teach her. She has to prove herself for several years by engaging in those water austerities. From what I can tell, it's essentially meditating in a waterfall, like trying to kind of keep your composure in a waterfall with the cold water and all that. Having to climb mountains like Mount Inari, that's considered like a physically and spiritually arduous task. But eventually she also gets inducted into these mysteries. And then Kinu will take her own disciples, and the one that matters the most to us is a woman named Sano, who is born in 1772. Sano is also from a farming family from what was then Mino province. Today it's Gifu prefecture in central Japan. Her grandparents moved from the city, though, to Kyoto, probably for religious reasons. Her family were Iko sect Buddhists, and the two head temples for the Iko sect are in Kyoto. So her mother is born in Kyoto, marries an aristocratic man named Isokawa Gonzo. Or excuse me, a retainer of an aristocratic family. He's not an aristocrat. But her father dies the year she's born, and by the custom of the time, when that happens, the wife and kids, unless there's a son, are sent back to their birth family. If it's a son, the son gets kept to continue the family line. Otherwise, you get rid of the wife, you get rid of the daughters. They go back to their original families. So the mom then remarries, but one of the conditions of remarriage at the time is to leave daughters behind. So she gets left with her grandparents, and then her mom and her grandparents both die by the time she's 16.
I'm noticing a pattern starting to develop in this religious group, which is that it seems to be a lot of women who do not have very good options in a society that is very strongly based on your family and particularly your marriage ties.
Absolutely. I'm forgetting that I should remember the name of this scholar, but there's a great book called The Problem of Women in Early Modern Japan. The problem being it's very hard to get good records of their lives. And one of the things she talks about is that women, when their lives are stable or they're able to achieve prominence, it's generally because they have the support of men in their lives. And as you've noted, these women have a lot of instability because of kind of absent men, absent husbands, absent fathers, right? That create this economic instability that then mediumship, because it's not regulated, gives you a way out, right? Because you don't need family connections because it's kind of a sketchy job, you can use it as a way to kind of survive where you might not otherwise be able to.
So there's kind of a mediumship gig economy happening here.
That is a distressingly accurate analogy, I would say.
Yeah, it's Uber for gods.
Wow. I mean, honestly, considering the amount you have to pay to get these mediumships done, yeah, I'd say that's fair.
Yeah, you just call up a god and God shows up.
Speaking of which, so Sano doesn't immediately go to the gods. At first, she's a servant. She gets married for a time when she's 22, and has a son named Shinsuke. And what appears to be a pretty good marriage, but then in her mid-30s, her husband dies in 1807. And she doesn't want to remarry, but she does need an income. And so, as you'd expect, divination, right? Just as we've seen, it's time to install Uber on your spiritual phone and start taking calls. What she says later about this is, quote, "Since ancient times I'd heard it's been said that humans are the ultimate spiritual being among the myriad things. By concentrating one's mind and undergoing proper training, one can thus acquire miraculous powers and astonish others by doing remarkable things. I wanted to acquire such miraculous powers and hoped to find someone who had mastered arts beyond the ordinary and teach them to me." So that's how she gets involved with Kinu, who is the disciple of Toyota Mitsugi. So the tree, so to speak, goes Mitsugi, then Kino, then Sano.
So I think we should probably take just a moment to stop and talk about what a spirit medium is, because especially for folks who have more of a grounding in Christian theology, something very, very different is happening here than in most Western forms of fortune telling.
So that's a good observation, or a good thing to mention. Yeah. So if you go to a shrine today, there is definitely there are oracles that happen. One of the most common is the omikuji, where you get your fortune told. You'll still sometimes see them do I Ching divination, though that's more common in China. But this is different. These kind of mediums, which generally do not operate in regular shrines, they can sometimes, but it's more uncommon. are thought to be fully channeling the god they are representing. Right. So it is the god, the physical presence of, in this case, Inari, coming down to Earth that you can then kind of ask questions of or beseech for aid. And if you're depending on how you do it, usually the gods respect a little bit of a nice monetary contribution to show your respect. The god may or may not intervene on your behalf. So this is directly channeling a god.
So yeah, there's some folk traditions in the West. Like I know voodoo's one, and there are probably a bunch of others that I'm not aware of, where a divinity inhabits your body. And this is more like that than it is like praying to a saint.
Yes, absolutely. And again, what's happening here is not fully traditional Inari mediumship, which in turn is not regular Inari worship. Here is how Sano recalls that Kinu told her what's happening here. Quote, "In fact, I've learned mysterious arts from a yin-yang diviner, a woman named Toyota Mitsugi, who lives in Yasaka, that's the Gion area of Kyoto, down the hill from Kiyomizu here in Kyoto. I practice austerities regularly, and little by little I acquired the ability to foresee the future and perform healing rituals. I have to pretend that I do these things as an Inari medium, because otherwise my clients will think it strange, and I would be in trouble if the magistracy became suspicious and decided to look into the matter. So I act just like ordinary Shinto diviners do when they call down Inari to predict the future. I pretend to be possessed by Inari. I hold the sacred wand in both hands, shake it, and fall to the ground. I put on a show of being in a trance and pronounce what the future holds as an oracle from Inari, or if I have an attendant with me, I have that person transmit the oracle to the people who have come to learn their fortunes. What ordinary Inari mediums do is in fact little more than a game. One can do it without practicing austerities. The method that Mitsugi transmitted to me, however, is extremely difficult. If you are indeed determined not to take a husband for the rest of your life or to have anything to do with lust, I will teach you this method. But it will be impossible to master it unless you first rid yourself of any inclination to be startled by what you see, and you cannot have the slightest fear for your life, so you must first perform austerities to secure an unwavering mind. You should go into the mountains at night, and you should stand every day under a waterfall or douse yourself with well water." And Sano does that, and supposedly she does it nightly for 3 years, and that's when she is then inducted into these mysteries.
So I'm noticing something a little bit strange here, which is that Japan has a whole lot of gods available in its pantheon. I'm not aware of any that would be illegal or illicit to channel. So what could they possibly be so afraid of here?
So it is true that there are not illegal gods here, but there are restrictions on religious practice. And in fact, this is not a state with freedom of religion at all. Obviously, if you know this period, you know Christianity is fully banned during this time period. And there are regulations on shrines and temples. The Kyoto aristocracy, their government, since the dawn of Japanese history, had a branch that regulated religious affairs to make sure that those religions were supportive of the state. And under the Tokugawa shoguns, there is the various jishabugyo, the magistrates of shrines and temples, whose job it is to make sure that whatever shrines and temples are preaching, they're not doing it in a way that is counter to the authority of the state. For a very long time, there were actually like anti-government religious sects. The Iko sect was one of the big ones, the Iko Iki sect of True Pure Land Buddhism, that did like launch anti-state rebellions or try to fight against the samurai class. And so like keeping an eye on religion, which can be this powerful motivating force, is very much a part of kind of state policy, for fear that otherwise the commoners will be misled and they'll be turned against the state, and it will destroy this kind of carefully arranged social fabric on which feudal society is built. So there is a reason to view these people with some suspicion. And it's also worth noting that any like art during this time, from like flower arranging to the martial arts or whatever, does involve a degree of secrecy, usually. All of these various schools, they have like what are called okuden, inner teachings, and you have to be a serious student to get access to them. That's what makes the knowledge valuable, is that you have to kind of prove that you deserve it to get it. And then part of maintaining the kind of value of that knowledge is keeping it secret yourself. So this is not hugely unusual. Like, it's not completely out there. But the fact that specifically Kinu is worried about what magistrates might think, that's very indicative of this kind of carefully controlled religious system.
I am beginning to really root for this group of scandalous unmarried women channeling an unlicensed god. This is a very cool and radical thing. I am very curious about where the story is going.
It's pretty neat. And here we get to some of the actual crimes, right? Some good scamming. So we're going to focus mostly on Sano and Kinu to an extent, who are kind of the center of how this all comes into the public light. The two of them relocate together to Osaka from Kyoto in 1816 because Toyota Mitsugi has the kind of Kyoto market, so to speak, locked down. You don't want to oversaturate the market. You know how it is. And to maintain the kind of secrecy of the school, they actually don't even they don't really interact that much with Toyota Mitsugi once the transmission of knowledge takes place. Sano says she only sees Toyota once from a distance, and otherwise they don't interact at all. The two of them, Kinu and Sano, move to Dojima in western Osaka. Kinu is generally of the two thought to be the stronger medium at first, so Sano will be kind of the front person. She'll be the one acting like an Inari medium, kind of playing the part people expect, and then relaying the information that Kinu does, that Kinu provides through her mediumship, using Sano's son Shinsuke as kind of a relay between them, right? He's the one who kind of passes messages back and forth.
Okay, so they are doing what they genuinely believe to be a sincere practice of mediumship, but they are dressing it up in a different god's mediumship practices in order to slip things past the government here.
Yes. And by 1819, Sano is thought to be strong enough as an oracle that she's fully inducted into the Mitsugi school and becomes she starts oracling in her own right. And here's where things get fun, because she starts to build her kind of circle of followers, starting with two of her neighbors. Their names are Harimaya Uhei and his wife Harimaya Soyo. So Sano is planning to leave town for a bit, for reasons we'll get into episode 2. What she says publicly is she's visiting her ancestors' graves in Hizen province to pay respects. But she's worried about her son. You know how boys be, they get into trouble, so she needs someone to keep an eye on him. And she wants Soyo to do it, but is worried Soyo is not going to take it seriously unless she feels some indebtedness to Sano to really watch her son. So she does a little divination, she calls in her god, and determines that Soyo's very worried. Her husband is very sick. While he's sick, her hairdresser has been trying to seduce her. And Soyo is apparently worried that, quote, if things were left as they were, she might be forced into an adulterous relationship with this man. And Sano tells Soyo, this is what I've divined. Soyo confirms all of it and desperately asks, please, Sano, can you help me? Sano says, I'll do a little divine intervention. I'll speak to my god. I'll talk to the management. And lo and behold, the pushy hairdresser just vanishes one day. He absconds. We don't know what happened here. I want to be upfront.
You know what? I've heard of worse ways of getting pushy guys to go away.
Yeah, I mean, it's very unclear because we just have Sano explaining what she believes happened in her interrogation, and she treats it very literally, like her god intervened to get rid of this guy. Did she just happen to cold read Soyo and figure something out with detective work? Did Kinu know what was happening and fill her in? I guess I can't discount the idea that divine intervention took place here. Did they just murder this guy? Did they have someone come break his kneecaps? We don't know.
God helps those who scare weird, harassing guys off themselves.
You know, I do know that the canals of Osaka were apparently great places to dispose of bodies, so...
What a fun mystery that is.
Oh, yeah. I mean, no one will ever know. So Soyo does take care of Shinsuke while Sano's out of town, and then when her husband Uhei recovers, the two of them agree that Sano's divine powers have saved their family from disgrace. They kind of owe her one, and they become her, I guess, henchmen. Her lackeys, her followers.
Well, this seems like even though it's not an officially licensed religion, it does seem like it has some structure to it already.
It does. And it's only going to grow from here. This is, okay. In 1821, Sano and Shinsuke by themselves relocate to the outskirts of Osaka today what's like northern Yodogawa, what was then called a village Shimosanba, just north of Osaka. Sano at this point is also trying to take her own disciples to continue to pass the chain, and she settles on a woman named Yae, who is a relative by marriage of her landlord. Yae's husband is both blind and mentally disabled for unknown reasons, so yet again, a woman who's like has this kind of position of being in difficult straits because she doesn't have a man in a very patriarchal society in the same way. So she convinces Yae of her magic powers by basically cold reading her, kind of like seeing her, telling her all that she sees in Yae's life. And Yae asks, please, can I learn your powers? And together, they set up what I can only describe as a prosperity gospel Ponzi scheme to make as much money as possible.
Oh man. Okay. All right. I am really, really curious about this because as I understand it, the religion in Japan at the time has nothing against asking the gods for prosperity. That's totally normal. And it seems like you do kind of make an offering to the god to get something back. So how does one get from totally normal prosperity requests to prosperity Ponzi scheme?
Yeah, the prosperity part of this is pretty normal. The way that works is Yae is going to go out and help Sano find people who will invest in her as a medium. They create this fictional story where Sano is a noblewoman from Kyoto who is both very compassionate and has mastered a kind of divine power that lets her help people in difficulty. She just needs some startup money to kind of set up her divine miracle business, her Miracle Max Emporium, so to speak. Right. And if you invest in her, of course, those benefactors will be richly rewarded. They'll receive prosperity first. And basically what they do is take money from people who invest to pay back previous investors. It's a Ponzi scheme, again.
Wow, okay, so that it literally is a Ponzi scheme. She's not saying, if you donate, I will pray extra hard for you. She is literally doing a Ponzi scheme here.
She is literally doing a Ponzi scheme. And so it's Yae's job alongside two others, a pair of masseuses, a couple named Kanzo and Toki, to spread the rumor of this Kyoto noblewoman and kind of get people donating. Now, thanks to the later investigation, I can tell you, because the magistrates of Osaka dug this up, literally every single article that was successfully defrauded by Sano from or by Sano from the people of this area. Are you ready to hear them? It's a long list.
All right. Oh, tell me.
Okay, from the top. Matsuya Gihei and his wife Fusa of Yazaemoncho in Dojima in Osaka were defrauded of 55 to 56 articles of clothing. Omiya Inosuke of Isemachi in Tenma, also in Osaka, 15,200 copper coins. Tami, a woman residing in the same household as Gihei, who is the legal guardian of a woman named Yoshinoya Ko and lives in the same village as Sano, 700 monmei in silver, 3 gold ryo, 24,500 copper coins, plus 61 or 62 articles of clothing. Tora, mother of Edo Yahachi and residing in his household, also of the same village, 100,000 copper coins, 46 articles of clothing. Hanemon, father of Nabaya Hanbei and residing in his household, also of the same village, 100 monmei in silver. Hana, mother of Minoya Sutakichi and residing in his household, also of the same village, 3.75 gold ryo, 3,000 coppers, 3 articles of clothing. Heishiro, farmer in the village of Naruo, Setsu Province, 11.25 ryo in gold, 200 monmei in silver. Kawachiya Manjiro and his wife Tora of Edomachi, 5 articles of clothing. I'm only half done. I have to catch my breath for a second. Toku, wife of Oshimaya Kiroko of Yazaemoncho, 7.5 ryo in gold, 242.5 monmei in silver. Kagaya Sanryo of the village of Kitano, Setsu Province, 192,000 copper coins. Wataya Zensuke of the same village, 30,000 coppers and 32 to 33 articles of clothing. Kawachiya Tokubei of Shinichi Uramachi in Dojima, 150 monmei in silver. Nagaraya Chubei of Suzukamachi in Tenma, 1,000 monmei in silver. Nagahameya Kuhei of Minami Kohatamachi in Tenma, 1,200 monmei in silver, 17 articles of clothing. Masuya Yasube of Kita Kohatamachi in Tenma, 22,650.32 monmei in silver. Matsuya Kichizo of Shinichi Uramachi in Dojima, 120,000 copper coins. And finally, her own landlord Yohei, who is the very first mark, 300 monmei of silver, 30 gold ryo, and then a further 32,000 monmei of silver and 101 articles of clothing. Whew.
Hey, Isaac, do you think you could do some quick calculations and translate that into bushels of rice for me?
Oh, God, absolutely not. But I can tell you the grand total is 59,000 monmei silver coins, 30 gold ryo, 720,000 copper coins, and 320 articles of clothing, much of which is pawned for an additional 72,000 monmei of silver.
This is making bank here. Okay, but the problem with Ponzi schemes is they inevitably collapse, and you got to get out of town real quick if you don't want some angry creditors coming after you.
So, you're absolutely right. That big problem with the Ponzi scheme is you have to keep investing money to keep the scheme going. And Sano actually remarks on this, quote, "In a greedy world, Yohei, Gihei, and Yasube were known to be particularly avaricious, and as they had put out large sums of money, I knew that if I didn't devise some means for showing them a miraculous increase in wealth, they would start to complain, which would interfere with the plan to spread the creed more widely. I therefore decided to distribute to them some of the money as contributed or obtained through pawning the clothing. Calling it interest granted by the deity, I had Yae hand over this share to them on several occasions, and distributed money in the same fashion to the others as well. Overall, I kept 21 or 22,000 monmei in silver, but I left the management of the remainder up to Shinsuke, who periodically gave some to Kinu as a token of gratitude to her as my master, and to Yae and Kanzo as payment for their labors. I have no idea exactly how much this came to be or how much was used up on household expenses." So she is spending a lot of what she receives, the majority it seems like, on keeping the Ponzi scheme going. Which is, of course, the problem with Ponzi schemes, other than the fact that they are deeply unethical.
Yeah, as types of fraud go, there is something very, very interesting about the Ponzi scheme as a thing that you can very easily get marks for, because in the beginning you can really show your success. But if you don't have an exit strategy, with that exit strategy being get the hell out of town, you could get in trouble really quick.
Speaking of which, have we done Ponzi yet? Like the man Ponzi?
We haven't done Ponzi, and I believe I may actually have a family connection to. I think the building that Ponzi did the majority of his work out of was something that my family actually ran a different business out of.
Very important to note, a different business.
So I should get on doing Charles Ponzi someday.
All right, so we're at the where it all comes to pass, because this is where the scheme all falls apart. Astonishingly, the Ponzi scheme does not hold up. The landlord Yohei, he starts to get suspicious. Initially, what he tells the investigators is that he buys into the whole Kyoto noblewoman thing. He's investing in her charitable acts to gain good karma, and he does get some money from that as well. He downplays this, of course, and says he's doing it for charity. And Yae also cons his mother and his wife, who are initially suspicious of her. But eventually all three of them, Yohei, his wife, and his mother, get wise to the fact that they are being played. One of the things they say tips them off is that normally when you donate to a shrine or a temple, you get like a receipt, essentially. You get like a good karma receipt. And these are not being handed out. Yae and Sano are not giving them out, and this starts to look a little suspicious. And so they confront Yae, who says, "You know what, you're right, we're not being totally forward with you. Would you like to guess what Yae says is happening here?"
Oh man, I mean, there's so much that she could say to explain why the celestial accounting is off here.
Well, would you accept in this scenario, you're right, I wasn't totally honest, actually the Kyoto noblewoman is a god come down to earth from Mount Inari?
And that prevents her from filling out receipts correctly?
Yeah, that it didn't work for some reason. That was the play, and it did not work, claiming that this was actually one of the gods of Mount Inari, and therefore I guess can't do math.
Look, a culture that is willing to give a literal god a physical standing within the court nobility system is a culture that expects gods to be able to fill out their tax forms.
Exactly. I couldn't put it better myself. So at this point, the family shockingly goes to Osaka. They involve the city magistrates. And lo and behold, Sano and company are arrested in the first lunar month of 1827, so roughly February-ish of 1827, for fraud. So, the officials investigating this are part of the office of the Machibugyo, or the city magistrates of Osaka. There are two of these magistrates, the eastern and western magistrates. That just indicates where their office is. It's not like a jurisdiction thing. They're responsible, among other things, for investigating and judging crimes in the Osaka area. Policing at this time is the work of samurai. We've talked about this before, so I'm going to go through it quickly. This is a stipended job a samurai could get from their lord as a way of sustaining themselves. Some commoners do this, do like the grunt work, essentially being like beat cops or informants, but it's mostly samurai managing the policing. When you are caught, you're brought into the office of the magistrate or a local, what basically is a police box, like a kind of magistrate's guard post, and you're interrogated to get a general sense of what's happened. Then you're eventually taken into the office, and you are interrogated in a place called the Courtyard of the White Sands. It's a great name. Where the magistrate himself would ask you questions. First, you're called in to provide basic stuff about who you are, social status, name, all that. And then you give a formal statement. Ideally, this is a confession. And then based on what you say, the magistrate decides whether or not you're guilty, and if you're guilty, what the sentence is. The main goal here is to get a confession. This is very important for the kind of Confucianized police structure. Confession is seen as an acceptance of social wrongdoing, and therefore kind of a rebalancing of the social situation, kind of renormalizing of it. And in some cases, judicial torture is allowed for the purpose of extracting a confession or generally getting information. Sano and the other members of her group do get tortured because there are concerns they are not forthcoming in their confessions. It's not clear exactly which of the tortures are employed on them. There's three major ones. Ishidaki, where you're buried, like you have stones basically placed on your legs while you're sitting. Ebizeme, which is where you're tied in distress positions. That's called the shrimp tie. Or Tsurushizeme, which is basically being tied up by your shoulders so they're slowly dislocated. And it's probably pretty bad for them because Shinsuke, Yaya, and Kanzo will all die in the interrogation process. So that's not good. They probably got roughed up pretty badly.
If you have a justice system where your criminals on trial don't even make it to sentencing, oh boy, that's rough.
It's not a great scene. And here enters probably the most famous player in our whole scene, the guy who is probably the reason this case is remembered as well as it is, whose name is Oshio Heihachiro. So he is a pretty famous figure in Japanese history. He's pretty young at this point, born in the first lunar month of 1793 in Tenma, in Osaka. His family are Yoriki. They're like beat samurai for the Eastern Magistrate's Office, going back 8 generations. Before that, their history is a little bit unclear. They claim a pretty famous descent, but that's usually made up nonsense. I don't believe it. Anyway, Heihachiro himself starts working as a Yoriki at 14, pretty young, and develops a reputation for extreme moral uprightness. Famously, he finds out a colleague in the Western Magistrate's Office is abusing his position and taking bribes, and basically like hounds this man with such intense interrogation and investigation of his moral standing, and then presses when this all comes to light for him to be ordered to kill himself. So like very little chill in Oshiro Heihachiro.
Wait. Back up a second. The Japanese legal system that is directly overseen by the shogun is giving 14-year-olds the legal authority to tell people to kill themselves.
I believe at this point he is in his early 20s.
Okay, well, that's so much better.
Yeah, that's much better, of course. So Oshio Heihachiro is a pretty extreme guy. He's a very extreme Confucian who is an adherent of a heterodox kind of Confucianism, a non-traditional one called Wangyang Mingism. which is a form of Confucianism that has this sort of moral intuitive notion, like you kind of know intuitively what's right, and also says that it is morally imperative to act immediately once you know is right. The famous saying associated with this is "jershing hui" or "chiko goitsu" in Japanese, the unity of knowledge and action. When you know what is right, you must immediately act.
Oh man, it is a shame that this guy was not born in the 21st century. He would have done numbers in the quote tweets on Twitter.
Oh yeah, no, he would have been an absolute Twitter warrior if he lived today. But instead, he just had to punish. He had to be a cop. So I don't know if that's an improvement. Yeah, so he becomes famous for being this very kind of fierce pursuer of justice, no holds barred. He'll go after anyone. Interestingly, he's most famous because several years after all this, in 1838, he will lead a rebellion against the government. Because he says government policies during a famine, hoarding rice, is making things much worse for people. And so he'll raise up a rebellion and burn a good chunk of Osaka before getting killed. But that's very much in the future at this point.
Okay, you know what? I'll give him this. He does take that moral intuition very literally.
That he does. It doesn't work out well for him, but I guess he's famous, so that's nice.
I'm also beginning to see why this is considered a fringe branch of Confucianism that does not catch on with the nobility in Japan.
Yeah, for some reason, government leaders don't like this one simple trick. So that's still 11 years in the future at this point. But it does explain why Oshio Heihachiro goes after what's basically a con ring with such intensity. Like, this is not that unusual, defrauding people using mediumship. So I think it's fair to say most investigators would not go this hard. But that's not his deal. There are no brakes on the Oshiro Heihachiro train. And he generally does not also like the kind of rough and tumble nature of mediumship. The fact that it's not socially regulated, that doesn't adhere to this kind of strict Confucian standard of propriety. So, it helps explain why he does this. It also doesn't fit with how he's often talked about today. Today he's viewed as this like defender of the downtrodden masses against samurai tyranny. But him beating up on a bunch of women who are in the end committing crimes to sustain their own livelihoods, it don't look great. Anyway, this is where we have our final twist. We're almost at the end of today's episode, but there's one more big reveal.
You have not yet revealed what god they are actually channeling here.
I have not.
There's such a wealth of options to choose from.
All right, so eventually Sano will crack under pressure from Oshio Heihachiro, and she will mention she's not an Inari medium. She'll say, I don't believe in Inari, I have a different god. So when Oshio Heihachiro pursues this, she says, going back, I learned from Kinu, who learned from Mitsugi, to pray not to Inari, but to a god that they call Tente, which translates roughly as the Emperor of Heaven.
Okay, so I am picturing here, what kind of dark, fucked up, eldritch god could they possibly be praying to this is such a shocker in Japan?
All right, so here's the deal. Sano says that she's been told Tente is a Buddha, right? So a Buddha of spiritual power, and taught her to chant a mantra, which is not uncommon for Buddha worship, but their mantra is a little bit weird. Let's see if you can make a sense of it. The mantra is Zensu Maru Paraiso.
Oh, that does sound like something that the evil cult chants in a Indiana Jones movie, but otherwise I can't make heads or tails with that one.
So, what really makes this all come together, remember I said that Sano took a trip to go pray at her ancestral grave, all that stuff. She had to recruit Soyo to watch her son for it. She admits also that's not what she was doing. She didn't go to her family's homeland. She goes to Nagasaki because she wants to see something called a fumie, which is an icon that's used to root out Christians. They're supposed to trample on the icon to prove that they are not believers in Christianity. And she says, I wanted to see one of these fumie icons so I could see my God firsthand.
Wait a second. Is she channeling the big JC himself?
That's right. Zensu Maru Paraizu's Jesus Mary Paradise. Yes.
Oh my God. She is... Okay, this is like 18 different kinds of sacrilege coming back around to a very sincere religious practice. This is what, okay, this is wild.
It is wild. And again, if we haven't mentioned this much yet, but Christianity is very illegal during this time period in Japan. Oshio Heihachiro has found more than a fraud ring. He has found an underground illegal Christian sect that is sustaining itself through fraud.
Oh my God. Wow. Okay. Well, if anyone is cool with sex workers, it would be Jesus Christ, I guess.
Yeah, that does come back around. So next time on Criminal Records, we will dive a little bit more deeply and reveal the truth behind this secret Christian religious group. But that's going to be a wrap for now. We'll talk next time a little bit about what these people believe, how it relates to more traditional Christianity, and how the long arm of the law comes down on them for their illegal religious beliefs.
Wow. I'm reeling here. This was not the god I expected them to be channeling at all.
Yeah, it's a bit of a curveball. It's definitely not what you'd expect. In the meantime, if any of our listeners have any secret underground religious sect slash fraud rings they want to report to us so we can get involved in them, where can they find us?
They can find us on facingbackward.com.
We're also on Blue Sky at bsky.social. We're facing backward on Blue Sky.
We have a Tumblr, which I'm going to try to update a little more regularly. And apologies if I accidentally reblogged something from my personal Tumblr and then deleted it.
Oh, the
we're
scandal.
Facing backward on Tumblr. Oh, yeah, you know all about which Baldur's Gate boys I find most attractive now.
I mean, I think the people need to know. The people need to know what they're supporting. Speaking of support, you can support our Baldur's Gate addictions at patreon.com/facingbackward. Asterion is the best boy, and I will hear no discussion otherwise.
You don't like Halsin?
No, I like Asterion more than Halsin.
Whoa, okay, we're gonna have a fight about that. But first, we should do our patron shout-outs. Thank you so much to folks who pledged at the shout-out tier. Jan Lettert, Stephen Elkins, Martin Oliveira, Clark Canning, Ian Kellett, Matt Haynes, Jackie Frostocker, Monkey Sack, Alayla McCullough, Kieran Murphy, Peter Wales, Robert Prine, William, Arno, Jonas Brandis, Nicholas Kroll, Jerry Spinrad, Jared Stevens, Jeffrey Dwork, Stefan Hrushka, Joshua Kane, Robbie and Kat, Jacob Key, Aaron Finkbeiner, an anonymous Anna's Hummingbird, Mark Sai, Gil, Leslie Ikuda, Trash Taste Enjoyer, Harrison Rees, Robbie Martine McAvoy, NihongoKaizen.com, Shimao Toshio's History of Japonasia podcast, A House is a Perfectly Cromulent Mascot, The Fish I Catch Are Rhodes Scholars Compared to Samuel Alito, Schmuck, and Everything Changed When the Fire Nation Attacked.
Until next time, folks, try not to illegally channel any gods. If you don't know the god, don't channel the god. This has been your 1990s PSA.
This might be your most sacrilegious episode yet.
Yeah, emphasis on yet.
Oh man, and I mean, like you've really got some bangers of sacrilegiousness, huh?
Hey, life is a process of growth. I believe I can surpass myself given time.